many aldermen, when I did a round of phone calls the weekend before my confirmation, I took nothing for granted. I wanted to be able to make sure I had their support. And more than a handful said to me, you know what they say about eating an elephant, right? And I was like, no, what? You got to do it one bite at a time. And I remind myself of that constantly. We can't move forward without taking even baby steps, incremental. We have to constantly look for the forward motion on things.
Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Meet Your Alderman. I'm Sarah Scott, celebrating my 1-year anniversary of moving to the city.
And I'm Eric Geber, celebrating my 32nd anniversary of coming to the city. Anyway, we're really excited to finally get back to, meeting aldermen. For those interested, we did also post a retrospective episode where we take a look back at the first season of the show. But this interview is actually our first of the new season. And what a way to kick off that season.
We spoke to Alderwoman Nicole Lee of the 11th Ward today, and this interview was significant for so many reasons. The 11th Ward, which covers the famous neighborhood of Bridgeport as well as Canaryville, technically does not include the adjacent Chinatown neighborhood. Loyal listeners will recall that Chinatown currently belongs to the 25th Ward. But with the redrawn ward maps following the 2020 census, Chinatown will officially become part of the 11th Ward starting in 2023.
Amid the constant disagreement over these new ward boundaries, the move to place Chinatown in the 11th Ward surprisingly seemed to face little scrutiny and was seen as one of the most common sense adjustments to make. And this is because Chicago's Chinatown, unlike many other Chinatowns across the country, has been getting bigger, with the Asian American population growing nearly threefold in the last 30 years. Chinatown has also expanded beyond its traditional boundaries into neighboring Bridgeport. You can see this for yourself. Just take a stroll down Halsted, south of 26th, which is clear Bridgeport territory, and you'll see all the Asian American markets and restaurants that line the street. Demographically, Asian Americans make up 39% of the population in the 11th Ward, 4 percentage points higher than whites.
This is certainly not the Bridgeport of yesterday. One of the first neighborhoods in Chicago, it was for a long time home to Chicago's poor Irish immigrants. Given the amount of political capital these immigrants would eventually amass, it is not altogether surprising that Bridgeport would also come to be home to 5 of the city's mayors, most famously Daley Sr. and Daley Jr.
The Daley family has maintained strong political ties to the 11th Ward. One of Daley Sr.'s sons, John Daley, has served as committeeman of the 11th Ward since 1980. His nephew, and Daley Sr.'s grandson, Patrick Daley Thompson, served as the ward's alderman prior to Nicole Lee. He'd probably be on the ballot for re-election, but was convicted April of last year on charges of filing false income tax returns and making false statements to the FDIC. His conviction made him ineligible to continue his aldermanic career and triggered a political appointment by the mayor.
Of 27 applicants, Mayor Lightfoot ultimately chose Nicole Lee, a former United Airlines executive who grew up in and still lives in the 11th Ward. As if following on the heels of a convicted Daley family member wasn't significant enough, Alderwoman Lee also became the first Chinese American to serve in city council and the second Asian American.
Okay, so do you have all this straight in your head? In this bustling little area of the city, you have the Daley dynasty, a political scandal, Chinatown expansion, and an historic appointment all wrapped up into one. Obviously, we covered all of this with Alderwoman Lee, but we also discussed other critical issues for the residents in her ward, including Chinatown. So things like education, policing, and anti-Asian prejudice, to name just a few.
This was a fascinating discussion, as Chinatown is definitely experiencing some growing pains. In addition to the anti-Asian sentiment aggravated by the pandemic, residents are having to critically examine some of their own beliefs. A traditionally insular community, Chinatown is learning how to better engage with a more diverse group of citizens, an effort that Alderwoman Lee considers one of her top priorities. We hope you enjoy.
Alderwoman Lee, thank you very much for taking the time. We're going to go and dive right in.
Sure.
We don't want to be too shy about how excited we are to have you on here. You know, your historic appointment, also what you represent for Chicago politics and Chinatown as well. First question we have is, how's your time in city council been so far?
Being new on the city council, being the first Chinese American, anything, and the first Asian American woman, and the first woman to represent the 11th Ward. So it's not just historic from a sort of Asian American representation perspective, but from a gender representation perspective for the 11th Ward, it's been incredible. My colleagues have, for the most part, been very welcoming and encouraging. No matter where you sort of land on the political spectrum, there are many things we all have in common, and that is we get beat up all the same way in our wards.
Mhm.
Right.
Folks have been great about just like tossing me little tips. If I'm sitting in a council meeting and, maybe I look a little lost or something, I might get a text from one of my little alder buddies who will say, okay, this is what's going on right now. Or if I've left the room at an inopportune time, where are you? You need to come back in. Those are things that I think, everybody's committed to my success.
Follow-up question on that is, obviously you were appointed, the situation around the appointment, of course, that there was an indicted alderman and he ended up resigning. He carries the infamous Daley name. How have you worked to take your ward beyond those ties, beyond what happened last spring?
First and foremost, I was committed to making this as seamless a transition as possible for the residents. As smooth as it could be, right? I mean, it was bumpy for a while. This ward had been without a full-time alderman for a couple of months. Obviously, there were some things going on, kind of got in the way of that. So, I really tip my hat to the folks that were remaining of the staff that were here, cheering on, sort of just keeping things moving. But there are a lot of things also that just couldn't move forward because there wasn't an alderman here to approve certain things. So, one of the things that I've been very committed to is that, I'm new to politics. I didn't come from politics, really wasn't aspiring to it, but I didn't come with a whole lot of baggage in that sense. So as people sought me out to sit down and have meetings, folks were pleasantly surprised about how easy it was to get a meeting with me, and for me, that was a sign that for some people, this office or whoever occupied it for whatever reasons felt inaccessible or unapproachable. And, I can't comment on like what's happened in the past, but like things like, one 67-year-old resident came into the office to pick up sock stickers or something. And I walked out to meet some residents and, she said to me, "It's so nice to meet you. I've lived here 67 years, my entire life, and I've not once met an alderman until you."
Oh, that's kind of crazy, especially considering the historic role of the alderman and those close ties. I mean, the 11th Ward is like super famous for being, I guess, more old school in their approach.
Yeah.
That's super surprising to hear.
I was shocked to hear it. And this individual was not Asian. I think that it's really easy from the outside looking in because of the reputation that the 11th Ward has had. People could very easily call it some sort of like race thing. And I don't find that to be true. I have also had folks come in who are interested in investing. They're from the community. They're, looking to develop housing, come in and sit down in front of me and say, we've presented this idea before in the past and we were told no and given no context or any other sort of like helpful information about like what else we should consider in order to get something done. So I think for a lot of folks, they haven't felt seen or heard. I've told people I'm not going to say yes to everything. And anybody that tells you exactly what you want to hear probably should be questioned a little bit. Because the reality is that in these positions, you can't. And whatever you do, it's going to upset somebody. And while I'm not going to say yes to everything, I will promise to always be fair and to listen. Folks that have, traditionally not enjoyed a very good relationship with the occupant of this office before me have said to me, well, your predecessor wasn't really interested in like community engagement and empowering the community. Like, what are you going to do to empower the community? And I said, well, let me be clear. I'm always going to listen and I want to hear all sides of it because I'm new to this. I don't have all the answers. And I'm going to seek out people who are experts, who have, valid opinions about things that are going on. I want to hear from the community about, what their concerns are with anything new that's going on in the ward. It's going to make my job a lot easier at the end of the day. So we'll call it enlightened self-interest, right? Having I think a better ongoing dialogue with the community, being able to anticipate and really getting people engaged, I think creates a sense of pride and ownership over the ward and over your community that I think we have a lot of room to grow into.
Yep, definitely. And I know that you previously were working in corporate America at United. Was curious how your skills that you've learned there kind of have helped you translate into the aldermanic role.
Here's how I draw the parallel. At my job on sort of corporate giving side at United, there was a limited pool of resources and a near endless pool of need. We had to develop a strategy for what we wanted to focus on as a company. Because obviously you can't say yes to everything. Like I love puppies, but that wasn't something that was a priority for the company. But no, to have some sort of like guardrails to guide your focus. That's something that I'm really looking forward to building alongside community members here about what the 11th Ward of the future looks like. Here's what we want to see more of. Here's what we want to see less of. And that's great. You know why? Because we know what sort of development to invite in and what sort of things we just absolutely don't want. So it's an easier no. What does the 11th Ward of the future look like for us? We are at the beginning of a new map. And we'll have these boundaries for the next 10 years. So in that 10 years, what do we want to see?
To confirm, with this new ward map, the 11th ward will now include Chinatown. Is that correct?
That is correct. It will include Chinatown, all of it.
And that is huge. I think that's super important. So more pointedly, what are your thoughts and predictions about Chinatown growth? I love that Chinatown in Chicago is, from what I understand, one of the few that is actually growing. So put another way, what do you think are the opportunities and risks for Chinatown in the future?
What a great question, Eric. Let's start with the challenges and then we'll go to the opportunities. So I'll flip that a little bit. I think education, availability of a good neighborhood option high school to serve in particular an growing immigrant population that does not speak English as a first language. So the Near South High School that's been proposed by CPS is something that leaders like myself, and actually many before me, have been lobbying for a really long time. So my kids' boundaries for neighborhood schools was Phillips Academy in Brownsville. Folks in the south of the ward are mapped to Tilden. And very few students from the community would end up going to the schools that they were mapped to. And we don't also have an integrated school on the south side of Chicago. So Lincoln Park is probably the best example of this. Now they have an international baccalaureate program, but that's a neighborhood high school too. And you don't get the kind of diversity and integration that you see at a school like Lincoln Park in a neighborhood option on the south side of Chicago. So I went to Whitney Young, and I want for our young people to have that same experience. Going to school with kids from other cultures changed everything for me. I went to an all Chinese Catholic school. After I finished the third grade, my parents said to me, "We're transferring you and your brother to public school." And I was like, "Public school? What?" They said, "You're going to a school called Mark Sheridan." It was in Bridgeport. So when my parents told us this, naive little third grade Nicole was like, "Oh, what if they find out I'm Catholic?" Like in my mind, I thought Catholic kids went to Catholic school, that the heathens went to the public schools, and that was that. I was a kid. I had no idea. So I can distinctly remember like walking into school, the new school that first day, and just like meeting a bunch of other kids that didn't look like me. What we bonded over, scratch and sniff stickers. I mean, that was the thing back then. Now I'm totally aging myself.
I think scratch and sniff stickers they're still pretty cool.
We can bring them back.
Yeah, they're universal. Absolutely. Yeah. But no, going to public school, going to magnet schools, was probably one of the best things it was a gift. That's how I view it. It changed my worldview. But this Near South High School and the opportunity to give our kids, because I do believe that's the best chance that we have to start bridging this gap that has divided our two communities, the African American community and the Asian community, is to have our kids be together and learn together in school. It's hard to change grown-up minds. I mean, there's just no two ways about that. I think the opportunity for our future really is, I'm going to sound super cheesy. I believe the children are our future, right? I'd like to teach them well and let them lead the way, if I can quote Whitney Houston. But getting back to Chinatown in terms of the challenges, one of the big things that I see right now, we've continued to grow because we've continued to have new immigrants come in. I think that's a real testament to the organizations that exist inside the community, like the Chinese American Service League and other agencies that really provide this incredible support network. And the double-edged sword of all of that, too, is that it also doesn't necessarily promote integrating and meeting new people either. It promotes this sort of insular behavior. Yeah, right. So you don't get out. And then for immigrants who don't have experience with other cultures, if their only experience with another culture, seeing Black and brown people, and I'll just get right to it, they're fearful because those are the people that they see that are coming in and committing the crimes in the neighborhood. when I was younger, and again, I grew up here in Chinatown. When I was younger, my elders, my grandmother would say to me, if you see someone who's black, you should cross the street. Like she was this again, this is the mentality. If you've never been around it, and it's not a justification at all. It's just really just sort of what was so for my family and for many others. So back to this, the whole point of me bringing up this story. There was a town hall that a local organization had put together recently about this near South High School. There's been quite a bit of controversy over its location, proposed location by CPS on former public housing site. And one of the comments that was made by a parent was something, and it was written on a piece of paper and read out loud. And it was something to the effect of, I don't agree with this location because I don't want my kids to go to school with homeless and low income students.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear all of the like, whoa, was that just said? Because, it was a mixed group. I mean, there were members of the African-American community there. There were Caucasian, there were Asian. And, and afterwards, I think a couple of people tried to acknowledge sort of the tension in the room and like the hurt that I think a lot of people felt. I was hurt by the comment, being said. And I knew where it was coming from. And again, it comes from this place of like these perceptions that are very real for people that are not necessarily grounded in diverse experiences. And I think like that's where we have to work in those spaces. Like I really would love for people to relate to each other as first and foremost human. I look at that conversation about this school and I think all parents, no matter what they look like, what color they are, sort of what economic status they're, they want their kids to go to school in a safe environment. They want them to be able to, deliver their children to this place of learning, get an education, and come home safely, not have to worry about it.
Right. And, so given what you said you heard at that city council, not the city council, at the neighborhood meeting,
Mm-hmm.
Curious, in general, like what are the Chinatown residents' thoughts on crime? Are they supportive of progressive police reform, community activism, things like that? Or do they generally take a more modest or conservative approach? And what do you think is the best way forward?
I think the average Chinatown resident is going to be a more moderate or conservative because of the amount of crime that we've experienced. And, and it's not just even like through COVID. I think COVID and the prior administration sort of willingness to just to open the door to, blatant racism, calling it the Kung flu and everything really
Right.
emboldened a lot of people to feel like it was okay to take out their frustrations on our community. And really the number of our elderly that were attacked, victimized in these incidences was just appalling. Because of that, we're one of the communities, and I've talked about this in some of the sort of more reform-oriented conversations we've had at the city council level. It's a difficult subject in my community because my community is actually looking for more police. They want to feel safe because they don't feel safe today.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's, as much as I may want to and see the need for reforms in different ways, it is also true that people still don't feel safe walking around in their neighborhoods. They worry about their grandfather walking to the store to buy a newspaper.
I think that really speaks to what you were saying earlier about how when you enter into city council, different aldermen and alderwomen like want different things for their ward. And I know we've spoken to people who are very much for, right, the more like progressive community policing and less police engagement in their wards.
Yeah. I think, I think all of these things can be true at the same time. And I think that we have to be open to figuring out like what pieces of each of those sides fit best together to address the current needs. Because I don't think that you can take sort of an all or nothing approach in either direction and really get to the heart of solving an issue. I mean, I am for more community policing because I think people need to be engaged. I don't think it should be I don't think it's the job of the mayor, the state's attorney, the police superintendent, any of these bodies, or me as the alderman alone to do like 70 different things that can address all of these.
Right.
I mean, wait, you're trying to put out a fire quickly at home. The best thing to do is to smother it, right? Take the air out. We haven't found a way to come at it at all of the right angles, because it's complex, and it's so like emotionally charged too for a lot of folks. I think the Chinese community has for many, many decades, maybe even generations, has felt very victimized, just not just from Black and brown people, but from white people too. I've heard plenty of stories of, people growing up in older generations than me, hearing racist remarks and being called, chink and whatnot, and telling us to go home. I mean, I had someone say that to me in the middle of the pandemic, and I was just walking home from a walk in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I literally had someone say, we used to own these streets, and you effing whatever chinks are buying up everything, and you're trying to take over our city. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, you need to move on, sir. I mean, he was drunk.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And he just kept going on. And then he rolled up on me, and I just dialed 911. I'm just like, you need to go. I'm like, there's a man, he's harassing me. He's walking towards me now. And his friend, quickly shoveled him in the car and drove off. But that's real. That's real for people. And people have been holding on to that. And it's all true, right? I mean, we need to be able to, I think, help police and help public safety. We have to have a different conversation about public safety.
Going off that, I'm curious to your mind, what is community policing? And I ask that just because I get the sense that community policing can mean different things to different people. So
Yeah.
In your mind, what is community policing, or what is effective community policing?
I don't know what effective community policing necessarily looks like, because I don't know that I've seen it yet.
Sure, that's fair.
In my mind, community policing it is a collaboration between people in the community, residents, community leaders, organizations, to work collectively to address public safety in a community. That's everything from you see that a street lamp is out and you're dialing 311, or you're calling the alderman's office. Mm-hmm. That we're communicating about those things, that this person's house has been abandoned. This building has been abandoned now. The windows are boarded up. Now we see that, there might be some gang or drug activity. Mm-hmm. So I think that is ensuring that there are open lines of communication, that the community feels empowered to share the information and safe in doing that. And the other side of that, and I think that's where we run into the biggest challenges today are, I'm out there telling people all the time, calls of service matter, right? It's a big challenge in the Chinese community because people don't want to report crimes. They don't want any trouble. They want to keep their heads down. They want to just sort of do their thing. And even when crimes are committed against them, there's a good number of the population that don't want to file the police report.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that's very problematic from a provision of service perspective. Services are driven based on call volumes. I give you a perfect example. There was so the night before my confirmation or the day before my confirmation, there was shots fired in a part of the ward that doesn't typically see a whole lot of activity like that. And residents were very concerned. Some of the footage was shared with the news, and I was asked by their block club president to have a sit down. And I did. I did that later in the week. It was one of my first orders of business, and I brought the police commander in with me. Mm-hmm. And he pulled a lot of the data for the area and the calls for service on that particular evening. It was a small meeting just of this block. There were probably 30, 35 people in the room. Mm-hmm. When the commander said, do you know how many calls? Can you take a guess at how many calls for service there were? The number was
just two.
Just two.
Wow.
So what happens is that people will hear something and then they won't say anything. Well, if they don't hear sirens immediately, they're just like, oh, it must not be anything. It didn't hurt me, so I don't need to call it in. Or they're relying on the one neighbor who's super active on the block to call it in. And the reality is what's needed, if you think of it as on a heat map, if there are only 2 calls for service in a particular area and there's 30 calls from another, where are the resources going to go? I mean, calls for service help the police also to develop and to sort of see patterns as well.
I think to kind of switch the conversation from crime to upcoming elections that are obviously on the horizon, we do have a question from a listener. It's Scott Wozencraft, who's also MPP student here at Harris. He said, with seemingly heavy turnover in the city council and an election on the horizon, what do you see as the challenges and opportunities for the next council?
So many aldermen, when I did a round of phone calls the weekend before my confirmation, I took nothing for granted. I wanted to be able to make sure I had their support. And more than a handful said to me, you know what they say about eating an elephant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, what? You got to do it one bite at a time. I remind myself of that constantly. We can't move forward without taking even baby steps, incremental. We have to constantly look for the forward motion on things. I think a good number of my colleagues have, they've served on the city council for a very long time. It's, I think over the last couple of years, it's gotten more and more challenging. The issues facing the city sort of after, or, in the midst of the pandemic and coming out of it, we see that all over the country too. So I don't think that's sort of abnormal. I think it's unprecedented, the number of older people that are not seeking reelection. And I think the opportunity there, though, is to potentially get some new blood in.
Mm-hmm.
People knowing what we know. It kind of feels like we're running into a burning building, or like I'm sitting in the burning building right now. Like,
right.
And my friends are kind of running out saying, "Hey,
yeah.
see ya."
Uh-huh.
No, and it's not like that. I mean, I've talked to some of my colleagues, and they've all told me, the ones that I've talked to, you need advice. You want, like, I'm here for advice and counsel. It's just time for me to move on to something else. And I think there's something to be said for that, right? If I felt for a second that I wasn't able to be effective in this role, I wouldn't do this anymore either.
Yeah.
Right? And I just got here, right? So yeah. I still feel like I've got some time to figure that out. At this rate, I'm going to have a hell of a lot of seniority over a lot of people.
Yeah, right.
I got it.
But so now I'm curious if you're so inclined to share this, do you have a candidate that you're supporting for the mayor's race?
I'm really focused on what the 11th ward is, what's going on in the 11th ward, the future of the 11th ward, and how I can continue to serve it. I think that there are a lot of people who are voting age, who are eligible, who have never registered to vote before. Then we also have people who are just frankly complacent. Like, I've met plenty of people, not just in the Asian community, but in particular, I think 2 election cycles ago, I had some data about the number of people that pulled absentee ballots. It was a great number, but we turned them in like very low numbers. So we're not completing the task of casting the vote at the end of the day. And I think we need to inspire people to get engaged. I mean, that's what I'm hearing more and more as I'm out there talking to people. Like, there are just some Chinese people just don't care to be involved. They may have different immigration statuses that sort of keep them from engaging. But the reality is that there are things that people frankly may be missing out on because they're so focused on just doing their thing, working, bringing home, resources for their families, and just really focused on their nuclear family versus seeing how they may fit into the fabric of the community. They may be missing out on city services and frankly, money and resources that exist for all residents, regardless of whether or not you're a citizen. And if you are a citizen and you have the ability to vote, you can be voting for, it's power, right? So there's power that's untapped in our community because they've, for whatever reason, chosen not to engage. So, I think that is a big challenge and probably our biggest opportunity. Having a slim Asian majority of voting age population is one thing, but that's not a guarantee of any real political power or voice if people aren't going to use it. This is the beginning of a journey. It's not the place that we finally arrived at. Like, here's where we start for real.
So now this last question is actually a 2-parter. It's a question that we ask everybody. And the first part is, where is your favorite place to get non-deep dish pizza in the city?
Non-deep dish pizza in the city. Oh man, I'm not going to get myself into any trouble. This is the correct answer to this question is Phil's Pizza.
Okay.
On 35th Street.
We're going to look it up. That's a great answer. And then the second part, because, the 11th ward soon will represent Chinatown, favorite place to get Chinese food?
It depends on what I want to eat. Chinatown has tons of different regional cuisines now. When I was growing up, it was predominantly Cantonese. Now we have a lot more variety. So if I'm looking for soup dumplings, as an example, my favorite place, again, I have to be careful because, I can't be like showing favorites, but places that I like to eat sometimes include Hing Ki at Chinatown Square, and they've got great food. I'm a big ongoing fan of Triple Crown. Lots of great dim sum places like Triple Crown, like Ming Hin. And if you don't want to deal with parking on the south end of the ward, Farama, they've got a lot better parking situation there that's free and a really big restaurant. So lots of places you can go.
This question always makes me so hungry. We're pretty close to lunchtime.
Thank you so much for just talking to us. I think I'm a little bit starstruck. I've been starstruck throughout the whole interview. We're really excited to see what comes out of the next couple months, the next couple of years.
Well, hopefully it's years. That is what I'm hoping for. And thanks for all that you guys are doing this. I think it's a great idea. I'm glad that my colleagues have also come on the show and shared some information. And at any time you guys have any other questions, you know where to reach me. Take care, you guys.
You too.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please rate and review it and let your friends know about us. You can also follow us on Twitter by searching the podcast name or by the handle Tweet Your Alderman. That's your spelled U-R. Send us a DM with a question you want to ask our future guests, and we'll be sure to include them.
This episode was produced, recorded, and edited by myself and Sarah Scott. Harrison Lee does our sound engineering. Graphic design was done by Olivia DePriel. And as always, shout out to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast Group. Here's to an even better second year.